Brothers and sisters, morning to you all. Today we are reading from 2 Samuel chapter 4. We have Pastor Joshua sharing. We have 12 verses here in this chapter. What do these 12 verses telling us? What does God want to tell us through this chapter? Yesterday, we talked about 2 Samuel chapter 3, and the title was He who follows God grows stronger as he walks. That's the title for yesterday. And today, as we read on chapter 4, the title is He who does not follow God grows weaker as he walks. One grows stronger, the other one grows weaker. As we look back on these previous few chapters of this Bible, so First Samuel chapter 31 and 2 Samuel chapter 1 talk about the death of Saul. First Samuel chapter 31 and 2 Samuel chapter 1. So God anointed David. David was to arise. But Saul was still king at the time. First Samuel chapter 15 verse 10, 1 Samuel 15:10. Now the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regretted I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 10 and 11. But then actually Saul was set up a monument for himself because he defeated Amalekites. He did not obey the commands of the Lord. And God said, he did not follow me. He has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. So, and then Samuel said that Saul, to obey is better than sacrifice. That's what Samuel told Saul. Saul did not listen to God. To Saul, there were only sheep and cattle. There were fear and people. All these bound, kept Saul in bondage. That's why even though God anointed Saul, he failed. This really reminds me a lot. God has chosen you. The Spirit of God is on you, is upon you. But yet, maybe out of our upbringing, our family background, we could be in bondage. We are full of fear. We do not trust God enough. Just like Saul, who did not trust God enough. He did not listen to God. He did not kill the king of Amalek. He left many good things, bad things, like the sheep and the cattle. He did not listen to God. He did not obey. And God said, he has turned back from following me. God regretted. That's why God chosen David instead. And God said of David that he was someone after God's own heart. So David was after God's own heart. So his heart always followed God. His heart followed God. Instead, Saul's heart followed people and the herd and the flock. You could see the difference here. From 1 Samuel chapter 15, talks about the fall of Saul. And then the rise of David. And during this process, it's not, okay, God anointed David and then Saul walked away and then David took the throne. No, it took a long time.
第31章講到掃羅自己喺黑暗當中走上戰場。
And then in 1 Samuel chapter 31 tells us that in darkness, Saul walked to the battlefield and then he fell on his sword, he committed suicide. And then 2 Samuel chapter 1, there was a young Amalekite fled from Saul. And report the news of the death of Saul to David. The death of Samuel ended 1 Samuel and then started the 2 Samuel. From 2 Samuel, Saul was not mentioned anymore. But in the whole book of 1 Samuel, Saul was mentioned throughout the whole book of 1 Samuel. In 2 Samuel, Saul died. And we saw the response of David. He killed the Amalekites who reported the bad news, the death of Saul. He did not rejoice over the death of Saul. And he said, how the mighty have fallen. He mourned for Saul. And that appeared 3 times in chapter 1. After reading 2 Samuel chapter 1, this line keeps ringing in my heart. The feeling of David that really stuck in me. What was the feeling of David? That's what I'm going to talk about today. I could keep all of you in suspense for now. Now, in chapter 2 of 2 Samuel, so Saul died. The 10 tribes in the north, or I would say 11 tribes in the north, it's only the house of Judah turned to David at that time. So David was king over Hebron and the house of Judah. He was only king over the house of Judah. The other 11 tribes supported the house of Saul. And then we have the Abner and then Isophapheth. So what should David do about Abner and Isophapheth? Actually, one was Saul's son, youngest son. So Abner and Isophapheth were together. They ruled over the 11 tribes in the north. So the commander of the army made Isophapheth as king. But actually, it was Abner who had the real power over the army and everything. And then at the end, Abner turned to David, and then in chapter 3, Abner was killed by Joab. Chapter 2 tells us the house of Judah, house of David, and house of Saul. So David was king in Judah, but then in the north we still have Abner made Isophapheth as king. And then in chapter 3 talk about there was a long war between them. So Abner was killed by Joab in chapter 3. David did not kill Abner. David did not like Joab because Abner defected to David. The commander in the north, bringing the whole house of Israel, turning to David. So it was absolutely nothing to do with David. But Abner died.
呢一個嘅係伊斯波切啦。
那剩下就是伊斯波瑟。
So only Ishbosheth was left in the
係當
north.
大衛喺北方喺南方做大衛家嘅王係冇問題嘅。
其實大衛在南方做
So it
猶
was
大家的
okay
王
for
是沒
David
問
to be
題
king
但係
in the
北
south
邊
over
掃羅
the house of
家
Judah.
喺度喎
但是
But in
北
the
邊
north,
掃羅家人
the
呢
house of Saul was still there, ruling over the 11 tribes,
這
right?
章聖經就第4章
Now,
繼續講
in chapter 4, it continued tells
掃羅
us
死咗之後，
當時掃羅死
邊
了，
個繼位咧？
after the death of Saul,
掃羅個仔咧，
who would
掃羅
succeed?
掃羅嘅元
There's
帥咧，
Saul's
掃羅
son
元帥，
呢兩個都
and
係
then
可以
Saul's
起嚟。
這
commander.
兩個都是可以起來的。
These two
仲有一個人喎，
還
were
有一個人，
arose, but there was
這
another
章有
one.
交代了，
就係
That's why we
約拿單
heard,
嘅仔
we,
喎
we
是約拿
learned
單的
from
兒子。
this.
掃羅家嘅
There's
人
Jonathan's
他也
son.
是掃羅家的人，
掃羅家
So
仲有
he
咩
was
人
also
喺度
in the
掃羅家
house
有
of
誰呢？
Saul.
一個元帥，
一個元
Who
帥，
else was in
一個
the
兒
house
子
of
一個
Saul?
掃羅
A
嘅孫
commander,
掃羅
a
嘅
son,
孫子
and a grandson.
呢一個
Saul's
約拿單嘅仔
grandson,
約拿單的兒子。
Jonathan's son.
大衛佢要做王啊，
大衛要做王，
神要高立佢。
So David was to become king. God wanted to anoint him, anoint him.
掃羅家怎
But
麼解
the
決？
house of Saul in the north, what should we do about it? And we can see
呢4章聖經都話俾我哋聽，
這4章聖經都告訴我們，
these four chapter 1 to chapter 4 tells
大衛
us
不出手，
佢嘅
David
心
never
意
take
他的
matter
心
into
仍然
his
是
hand.
after God，
His heart was still after
這些
God.
該交給神。
Everything else he left to God.
掃羅家怎麼樣？跟
The
大衛
house
有
of
關的
Saul had nothing to do with the
呢個
house
對
of
我哋嚟
David.
講好重要
He
這個對我們
committed
來
to
講
God.
很重要。
This is an important message to us all. God wants to use you.
神要興起你，
我哋應該
God
點
wants to
辦
raise you
我們
up.
應該怎麼辦？
但係我哋
What
仍然
should
面
we
對好多
do?
攻擊嘅喎，
但我們仍然面對很多攻擊，
別人
But we
攻擊
still
我哋
face a
喎
lot of attacks. People attack us.
我哋應該點辦呢？
我們應該怎麼辦？
你喺你嘅
What
家
should
族
we
入邊
do?
神要興起你。
你在你家族裡面，神要興起
In
你
your family,
你屋企人
God wants
兄
to
弟
raise
姊
you
妹
up.
啊其他啲侄
But
仔
your
女可能
family
入唔得
member,
你
your
喎
siblings,
你的家人啊
or
你的兄
the
弟姊妹
cousins,
啊
the
你的
nephew,
侄兒
they
啊
couldn't
他們
take it.
對你不行。
你喺公司入邊，神要興起你啊！
你在公司裡面，神要興
你
起你。
啲同事
In
由
your
得你喎
family, God
同事
wants to
就是對
raise you
你
up,
不行
but your colleague didn't like
很
you.
多閒言閒語，
好多嘅 politics 啊。
很
There
多的
was
政治
a lot of gossip and politics. What should you do?
喺呢個社會入邊，
在這個社會裡
甚至喺
面，
我哋城市入
In
邊，
this
甚至在
society,
城市裡
神
面
要興起
even in
我
our
神要
city,
興起我們，
但係我哋亦都面
God
對
wants to raise us up.
嘅艱難喎。
但是我們也面對很多的艱難，
好
But
多
we
嘅
face a lot of
很多壓力
hardship,
人會講唔
a
同嘅
lot of
嘢喎
很多人會
pressure.
講不同的話。
我哋又
People
應
will say
該點
different
辦
things
那我
about
們應該
us.
怎麼辦？
What should we do then?
呢4章聖經其實就係話俾我哋知，我哋應該點做。
那這4章聖經
This
就是告
fourth
訴
chapter
我們
tells us
我們應該
what
怎麼
we
做
should do.
撒母耳記下第4章，我俾個標題就係唔跟從神嘅人咧。
Second Samuel chapter 4.
撒母耳記下
He who
撒母耳
does
記
not
下第4
follow
章我們的
God
標題就是
grows
不跟從神的
weaker
人
as
越
he
走越弱。
walks.
第一段咧，
第一段
1節至到第
Chapter, the
4
first
節
paragraph,
4節1到3
verse 1
節
to 4, verse 1 to
1到3
3.
節
The first paragraph, verse 1 to 3.
掃羅家守遠，
掃羅家守約，
The house of Saul,
所有以色列人驚惶。
所有以色列人驚惶。
我將第一節。
the house of Saul lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. So that's verse 1.
掃羅的兒子伊施波設聽見押尼珥死，
When Saul's heart heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled.
手就發軟。
喺北方嘅呢一個嘅王咧，掃羅家嘅兒子伊施波設一聽到
Saul's son Ishbosheth heard
死喺希伯倫，佢
that
就
Abner,
手都
the
軟
commander of the army, died in Hebron. He lost heart, and also his hand grew
他就手都沒
feeble.
力了，發軟了。
以色列眾人
以色列眾人
就係
And all Israel,
所有嘅以色列人
就是所有以色列人
all Israel
都驚惶，
也都驚惶。
was
即
troubled.
係喺北方咧，從上至下個個都手軟，個
In
個
the
都
north,
驚惶。
from the greatest to the smallest, they lost heart, they were troubled.
聽到嘅話就係死啦死啦，今次我哋死啦死啦，元帥死咗啦。
They heard, "Oh no, no, woe to
死了
us!
我们死定了
Woe
元
to
帅
us!
死
We
了
are
我们被
doomed.
救了
大衛要嚟
The
殺我哋
commander died. David will come and take our life."
很怕很怕，
They were so,
佢
they were
整個以色列
terrified,
都好驚
frightened.
整个以色列都在
The
恐
whole
惧，
Israel was
Wow.
troubled and
王也
terrified.
很怕。
掃羅的
The
兒子
king
伊
Ishbosheth
斯波設有兩個
was
軍長，
扫罗的儿子
now
伊斯波
Saul's
设
son
有
had
两
two
个
men
军
who
长
were
呢
captains
兩
of
個軍長
troops
一
of
名巴拿
troops.
一名利甲，
一名巴拿，
The
一
name
名
of
利
one
甲
was
係便
Ba-
雅憫
Banar, and the,
之
the
比
the
錄
name
人
of the
臨
other
門的兒子
Rechab,
比錄也屬
the
便
sons
雅
of
憫
Rimmon,
是
the
便雅悯支派
Berothite
比路
of
人
the
尼嫩
children
的
of
儿子
Benjamin.
比路也属便雅悯。
嗱呢度特別講係便雅
For
憫，
Beroth
這裡
also was
特別
part
講
of
便雅憫。
Benjamin. It
掃羅係
specifically
便雅憫支派
mentioned
掃羅
that
是便
they
雅憫
were
支派。
Benjaminite. Saul was of Benjamin.
這裡伊斯波設兩個
So
軍
the
長，
here the captains of troops of Ishbosheth,
元帥死了，
the commander of the army died,
那
Abner,
兩個軍長怎麼樣
and the
呢？
captains of troops, what did they do?
呢兩個軍長一陣間會講到嘅。
等一下我會講這兩個軍長。
We'll talk about these two captains later on.
哋嘅便雅憫家嘅人嚟，便雅憫支派嘅人。
軍長也是
They-
便雅憫支派的人，
They are the children of, they were the children of Benjamin,
那裏寄居最
because the Beerothites
比路
fled
人
to
呃
Gittim
早
and
先
have
逃
been
到基拉
sojourners
因在那
there
裡寄
until
居
this
直到
day.
如今
Verse 3.
巴拿同埋利甲咧，
We are on
係
verse
比
3.
錄人臨門嘅仔。
巴拿利甲是比
So,
路人的兒子，
Banar and Rechab,
是便
the
雅憫
sons
支
of
派的。
Rimmon,
呢班
belong to the children of
比錄人
Benjamin.
咧，即係包括係呢兩個軍長嘅父親咧。
這個比路人包括這兩個軍
So
長的父親
Beerothites, including the
歷史
father of
記錄係
these
點
two
他們的歷史
captains,
記錄是怎樣？
就話
what was the
早
history
先
about them?
逃到基他音，在那裏寄居，直到今日。
他說
Because the
早先逃到基
Beerothites
拉因在
fled
那
to
裡寄居直
Gittim
到
and
今
have
日
been sojourners there until this day.
是
Verse
什麼時
3.
候逃到基拉因呢？
When did they flee to Gittim? Let's turn to
31章，撒母耳記上31章第7節，
看到撒母
1
記上
Samuel
31章第7節
31,
即係最近呢
verse
一次。
7.
最近這
住
一
平原下邊並約旦
The,
河西
the
的以
most
色列
recent.
人
And when the
見
men
以
of
色列
Israel who
軍
were on the
逃
other
跑
side of the valley and
掃羅
those who
和他的
were
兒子
on the
都
other
死
side of
了
the Jordan
他就
saw
棄
that the
城
men
逃
of
跑
Israel had fled
做
and
平
that
原
Saul
那
and
邊
his
並
son
約
were
旦河
dead.
西的以
They
色列
forsook the
見
city
以
and
色列
fled,
軍
and
兵
the
逃跑
Philistines
掃羅
came
他
and
兒子
dwelt
都死
in
了
them.
也就棄城逃跑。
1
非
Samuel
利士人
chapter
便來住
31,
在
verse
西東
7.
啊！呢啲比錄人咧，佢哋見到掃羅失敗，佢哋逃跑㗎。
這些比路人看到
So the
掃羅失敗
Beerothites
他們就
saw
逃跑
that
呢
Saul
兩個
was
嘅仔
defeated.
咧
They
又返返
fled.
嚟啦。
後來這兩個兒子
And
又
these
回來
two
了，
sons returned to the house of
因為
Saul
是伊斯波設喜歡
because
所以就成為佢哋嘅
Ishbosheth
軍長。
aroused
那他
and
們就
became
成為
king.
他的軍長。
So these two
佢哋嘅
sons
心咧就
became
成
captains
動
of
搖
his
但是他們的
troops.
心裡面是動搖的。
But their hearts were wobbly, were shaken. These two
個心係
captains,
動搖
心是動搖的，
好
their
驚非利
hearts
士人
很怕
were
非利士人
wobbly.
好怕失
They
敗。
were
很怕失敗，
terrified of the
很
Philistines.
怕死
They were afraid of failure. They were afraid of death.
現在聽到
Now they heard
呢個係
that
元帥死咗啦，
元帥死了，
Abner, commander of the army, died.
佢又點咧？
他又怎麼樣？
佢其實都好驚。
他也很
What
怕
did they do?
自
They
己
were
因為第一節
terrified.
講
They
到
were
咧
so
因為這個
afraid.
第一章
Because in verse 1 it says here,
驚惶
all
以色列
Israel
眾人
was
如同
troubled.
驚惶
All Israel,
包括這兩個人，
呢兩個
including
仔
these
這
two
兩個人也很
sons,
佢以
these
前
two captains, they
佢
were
父親逃跑
以
terrified.
前他父親
佢都
逃跑，
逃跑啦。
In the
他也逃
past,
跑
後尾又
their
翻返
hus-
their
Hola,
father
Hola.
fled. They
Hola.
fled, but they
Hola.
returned.
重演
Now things
重
happened.
演
國家又面
The
對呢
history
個危機嘅時候
repeated.
國家又面對這危機的時候，
Now their country faced this
兒子
trouble.
那你要死了
Commander died.
王就好驚
Abner
就
died.
很怕，
所有以色
The
列人
king lost
所有
heart,
以色列人都很
and
怕
all Israel was
包括這兩個
troubled,
軍長
including these
特別
two
提這
captains.
兩個軍長也很怕，
These two captains were
在這危難
terrified
當
as
中
well.
他們
In this distress, in this hardship, they were terrified.
呢度就交代到呢度。
啊，這裡就交代到這裡，
王手
So
軟
it's up here.
大家都好驚。
王手軟，大家
The
都怕
king lost heart, and everyone was troubled.
掃羅家入邊咧，
在扫羅家裡面，
嗱，呢個王
In
就
the
手
house of
軟啦
Saul,
這個王就手軟了。
大家都好
the
驚
king
啦
lost heart.
但係仲有一
All
個人
Israel was
還有一個
troubled.
人要交代，
就係掃羅嘅
But
孫
one more
是掃羅的
person we need to
孫子
mention. That's
約拿
Saul's
單
grandson,
同係有恩於大衛噶嘛。
Jonathan.
約拿單
Verse
是有恩於
4,
大衛。
Jonathan showed
約拿單嘅
grace
仔又如何
to
呢？
約
David.
拿單的兒子又如何
And
呢？
what about
伊斯
Jonathan's
波切
son?
呢做唔到嘢啦，
伊斯波瑟不能做什麼，
Ishbosheth
手軟
didn't do anything, couldn't. He lost heart.
手都不能
His
做，
hands grew feeble. He was unable to lift up his hand. He was totally strengthless.
那約拿單的兒子
Everyone
又
was
怎麼樣
troubled. How about Saul's son, Jonathan's son? Could he arise
他
and
可
be
以起來帶
son
領
and
以
be
色列
king?
人嗎？
Could he lead the Israelites?
這裡就
That's
第
the
二段
second
第四節
paragraph.
了。
Verse 4 on its own, second paragraph.
年幼兼瘸腿，
Mephibosheth.
米非波瑟年幼
Mephibosheth was young and lame.
年幼又瘸腿啦。
年幼又瘸腿，
掃羅的
He
兒
was
子約拿
young
單有一個兒子
and
名叫米非，
Lame.
是瘸腿
Jonathan,
的
Saul's son, had a
掃
son
羅
who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from
掃羅的兒
Jezreel.
子約拿單有一個
And
兒子名叫米非波瑟，
verse
是
4.
瘸腿的。掃羅和約拿單死亡的消息從耶斯列傳到的時候，他才5歲。
他與母抱着他逃跑，因為跑得太急，孩子掉在地上，腿
And his nurse took him up and fled, and it happened as she made haste to flee that he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth.
米非波設喺呢個時候咧，佢係年紀好細，
米非波瑟這時候年紀很小，
So Mephibosheth was young at this time, and he was lame.
腿咧
他為什麼會腿
就係
瘸呢？
逃難嘅時候
Why was he
因為
lame
逃
in
難的
his
時候
feet?
腿就
Because
瘸
he was
了
running away, he was
很小的
fleeing.
時候那
He
個
was young, he was only 5, and then he
掉在地
fell.
上腿就斷
He fell and became
就
lame.
走不到了，
年紀
He
又
was
細
unable to
年紀
walk.
又小，
隻腳又跛，
He was young.
那對
He was lame in his feet.
佢唔適合做王嘅。
他不適合做王的，
佢唔
He was
能夠起
unfit
不能
to
起
be
來帶
king.
領。
嗱，呢度
He was
所形容
unable to
嘅
lead
係
the
北
people.
方嘅有份嚟爭霸嘅人咧，
這裡形容是北方有份
So it
與
talks about in the north those who were eligible to
就是有
fight
份
for
要跟大
the
衛爭霸的
kingship
人
with
掃
David.
羅死了，
They were eligible.
約拿單又死啦，
Saul died,
約拿單也死了，
所有
Jonathan
兒子都死
died
晒啦
所有兒子都死了，
剩翻呢一個嘅
all
伊斯波切
Saul's sons
剩下的
died
伊斯波瑟，
仲有佢嘅
except
元帥啦
Ishbosheth
他的元帥，
仲有
and
係
also his commander
米非波
Abner
設啦
還有這個米非波瑟，
and also Mephibosheth,
約拿單的兒子，掃羅的孫
Jonathan's son and grandson of Saul.
咁
These
亞尼爾
people
上一章
were
就死咗啦
left.
亞尼爾上一章死了，
So Abner died in last chapter,
伊斯波切，
就剩伊斯波瑟。
而家個
and only Ishbosheth was
來到
left.
第
4章
來到
That's
第
the
四章
picture now
伊
in
斯
chapter
波
4.
瑟手軟了，
But Ishbosheth lost heart and
站也站不起
uh,
來了，
he couldn't stand. His hand were
所有以
feeble.
色列都很驚慌。
Oh, Israel was troubled, including the two captains
可
of
能
the
元帥下面就
troops.
這兩個軍長，
Maybe after Abner
聽兩
were these two
軍長
captains.
也很怕。
The captains were terrified.
約拿單嘅仔，
And
約拿單的
also
兒子
掃羅嘅孫，
Jonathan's
掃羅的孫
son,
子
年紀又細唔識
Saul's
年紀
grandson.
小不懂事，
He was young, he didn't know
可
anything.
是腿又瘸了。
以色列人
He was
點可以
lame on his
靠
feet
佢
in
呢
his
以
feet.
色列人怎麼可以靠他呢？
How could the Israel rely on
以色列
him?
家怎麼可以靠他起
How
來
could the
呢？
house of Benjamin rely on him?
是不行的，
No, they couldn't.
冇人，
沒有人。
He was unfit.
剩翻大衛。
No one
就是
else.
大衛
Only
再嚟
David
睇咧第4段，
我們再
was
來看第
eligible.
四段
Now the third paragraph,
至到第8節，
5到8節，
verse 5 to 8.
便雅憫人
The third paragraph.
殺伊斯波切，
便雅憫人殺伊斯
The
波瑟。
children of Benjamin killed Ishbosheth.
第5節，一日比6人臨門的
Verse 5. Then the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab, and Banar set out and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at
利
noon.
甲和巴拿出去，约在午热的時候，到了伊斯波瑟的家。伊斯波瑟正睡午覺。
一日比6人臨門的2個兒子，
一日比路人临门的两个
Then
儿
the
子
sons of Rimmon,
临門
the
踢足球最中意臨門一腳。
Beerophite.
踢足球就說臨門一腳。
Rimmon sounds like
臨門係咩意思？
you're going to score in
臨門是什麼意思呢？
football term.
其實
So
佢係一個
Rimmon, what does that mean?
嘅偶像
其實它是一個，
嘅意思係嘅神
It
嘅
was
名。
actually
它
an
是一個
idol
虛擬
of
偶像
Assyria.
神的名字。
呢度話臨門兩個仔，
這裡說臨門的兩個兒子，
The sons
好
of
似係邪
Rimmon.
靈嘅兩個仔。
好像邪靈的兩個兒子。
It's like the sons of
邪靈的
evil
兩個兒子。
spirits. Sons of
呢
the
兩
evil
個軍長
spirit.
好驚喎，
這兩個軍長很怕，
驚到一個地步，
So these two
到一個地步。
captains were terrified to the point
佢哋要去刺殺
他們要去刺殺，
伊斯波切。
they want to
Isboset.
kill
佢哋諗住殺
Isbosheth.
伊斯波切，
他們想殺了伊斯波
佢
瑟，
哋起
They
咗
want to
歪念
kill Isbosheth.
的歪念，
殺咗伊斯波切，
They had some evil thoughts. After
將佢嘅手給
killing
攞起
Isbosheth
他們的首級拿去給大衛，
and show David
大衛就
Isbosheth's head,
大衛就不會殺我們，
並且
then David will not kill us.
並且大衛會用我們，
And David will use us.
我們要幫大衛。
We must help David.
以前掃羅打敗仗就驚到走啦嘛，係咪帶住佢哋？
他父親以前
So
早打敗
his
仗就帶着
father,
他們
when
跑
Saul was defeated, was so afraid that he
回
fled.
來了又面
Now
對
they
危機
return, now they face
這
crisis.
個危機怎麼辦？
What should they do in this
睇
crisis?
住呢一個嘅伊斯波切，
看着這個伊斯波瑟，
They look at Isbosheth,
怕到手都動不了，
淨係喺度
who
瞓覺
had
只是在那
lost
睡
heart.
覺
He was just lying on his bed all day.
不如殺了他，
然
Why
之
not
後
we kill
去
him?
投靠大衛，
然後去投靠大衛，
或者
And then we
或者可以
defect
達
to
到獎
David.
賞，
Maybe we will get some
那
reward.
可
That's
以
the
拿
thought of the
拿
two
回
captains.
官辦職也好，
所以佢就假裝
Maybe we try to get some positions in
所以假
David's
裝
camp.
進去拿麥子，
佢有權入呢一個伊斯波切嘅屋，
他是有權進到伊斯
冇人
波瑟的
攔佢。
They had the right to go into the house of Isbosheth. No one would stop them.
就是說他位分很高，
That means they held high position
其實伊斯
in.
波瑟是靠這
So
兩個人
Isbosheth was relying on these two
咁樣去挑
captains.
戰呢個佢嘅元帥咧，
他敢去挑戰他的元帥
係押尼爾啊，
亞尼
They
爾，
dared to they dared to challenge
同我
Abner.
父親嘅妃嬪一齊。
你為什麼要跟我父親
Isbosheth
的妃嬪
challenged Abner, say, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?
為什麼你讓我做王，你自己
Why
卻
have you
想
made
做
me
王
king, but you also want to be king?" That's the conversation between Isbosheth
因為
and
有呢兩
Abner.
個軍長
因為他有這兩個軍長，
So maybe he was under the pressure of these two captains,
呢兩個軍長，
but he got it wrong.
這兩個軍長現在
These two captains, right
進到
now,
他房子，
將佢
enter into his house
把他刺殺了，
and stabbed him in the stomach.
刀就刺穿佢，
一刀就刺穿了，
Stabbed him in the stomach
然後
with
割下
one
他的
blow
手機，
行咗一
and then cut off
走
his
了
head,
一天一夜，
beheaded him, and they all night escaping through the plain and went to Hebron.
俾大衛。
把王的首級
And
給
they
大
brought the
衛，
head of Isbosheth to David at Hebron, verse 8.
死咗啦，
伊斯波瑟死了，
Isbosheth
所
died.
以死咗啦。
元帥死了，
仲有呢兩個
The
軍長
commander of the
還
army
有這
died.
兩個軍長怎麼樣？
And what about these two captains of
他們下場是
troops?
怎麼樣？
What was their outcome?
我們再往下看
第
And
九
let's
節
read
至
on.
12節
9到12節，
呢度我
Verse 9 to 12, the fourth paragraph.
這裡重點不是講這兩個軍
The
長，
key point is not on the two
這裡兩
captains.
我的重點是
The,
講大
the
衛。
key point in this paragraph
大
is
衛
on David.
不倚靠人的心永不改
David did not
大
re-
衛不倚靠人的心，永不改變。
我同時想
The
講
heart
就係
of
大
David
衛單單倚靠神的心永不改變。
同時，我想講
the
大
heart
衛
of
單
David
單倚靠
relying
神的
on
心
God
永不改
alone
變
never changes.
即係兩個都係
That's
好
the
好
subtitle.
兩個都
But
很好。
I couldn't decide that it's either he never relied on
大
people
衛單單
and
倚
he
靠神的
always
心
relied on God. That's his heart and that never changes.
就是大衛跟從神的心，
The heart of David
改變。
following God never changes.
相反嚟講
Never
就係大
change.
衛唔倚靠人，
On
相
the
反
on
來
the
說，就是
opposite,
大衛不倚靠人，
David
大衛
did
嘅
not
心
rely
唔
on
倚
man.
靠人，
大衛的心是不倚靠人，
The heart of David never trusted man. He trusts God
不
alone.
改變。
His heart
但係
never
我睇到
changed.
當佢大家要當掃羅追殺佢，而 大衛有兩次有
When
機會殺掃
Saul
羅嘅
was
時候，
seeking his life twice David had chance to kill Saul, but he
佢都
didn't.
唔喐手，
他都不動手，
但係佢嘅下屬一路叫佢
He
喐手。
但
didn't.
是下屬一直叫他動手。
But his people under him always say that kill Saul, kill
你不
Saul.
殺他，我們就死。
If you don't kill Saul, we will be killed. We will be dead.
咁最後仲有一次喺洗革拉亞瑪力人擄掠晒佢哋啦，係咪？
最後一次在喜格拉亞
The last time in Siklag, the Amalekites took everyone away. And then all the men want to stone David to death. Remember that story? And yet David strengthened his heart in God.
大衛從來唔靠人。
大衛從來不靠人，
David never relied on man. Can you see
他的
this?
心是 after God。
His heart was after God.
After people。
掃羅的心是 after。
Saul's heart was after people.
喺呢個時候咧，
那在這個時候呢，
我哋睇下大
At that
衛
time,
真心嘅回應。
我們看到大衛真心的回應。
呢兩個
The
人攞住
heartfelt response of David. These two men got the head of Ishbosheth, Saul's son, to David.
全都解決了，
So the north was
沒有
settled.
人可以起來了。
No one else would arise, would be
約
eligible.
拿單的兒子以利
Jonathan's son was young and lame in his
沒
feet.
有人會支持
No
他。
one would support Jonathan's
北
son.
方的元帥又死了。
所有嘅仔
The
都死
commander over the north died. All Saul's sons died, including the last one,
大
Ishbosheth.
衛會怎麼樣？
What would David
喺
do?
呢度。哎呀，真係多謝你哋啦！
大衛不是說哦，
He
謝
doesn't
謝
say,
你們哦，
Thank you so much.
你們這
He
麼幫
didn't
忙
say that.
膊頭坐啦
You are
坐啦
such a great help.
拍
Pat
他
on the
然後
shoulder,
請
let's
坐
have a
然
cup
後
of tea,
喝
let's have a drink.
大
No.
衛是不靠人的。
喺
David
實
did not
際
rely on people.
嘅係爭霸當中，
在實際的爭霸裡面，
即係你
In the
諗返譬如
actual
係我哋
fight,
屬中國歷史嘅春秋戰國啊，或者係三國時代啊，係咪？
我們熟悉中國歷史的。
so this happened in Chinese history all around when people fought for power. Then we have the three nations
魏國、蜀國、
standing and
帝
fighting.
國蜀國還有吳
That's
國
Chinese history.
吳國，
I'm sure it also happened in
各
other
據一方，
各自
nations.
籠絡人才，
You know,
各自籠絡
we have
人
freed,
各自咧
you know, warlord,
各自要出計謀
three nations.
其實他們都是靠人的。
They rely on people.
即係喺呢一啲嘅歷史嘅爭戰入邊咧，人係好重要啊！你睇到掃羅就係咁啦。
在這些歷史征戰裡面，人是很
In
重
the
要的。
battle,
掃羅就是
throughout the
這樣
history, people are important.
這是
Look
天
at
然人的
Saul.
本性。
That's our nature. That's human nature to rely on people. But yet, David's heart was always after God's
從
own
來都
heart.
是這樣。
好一致，
He never changed.
從神選
He was consistent.
一路咁多
Ever since God had chosen
一
him,
直這麼多
all the way, all this
聖
chapter until chapter 4 of 2
這麼多年的
Samuel,
逃亡
all running away for his life for all these years, fighting the battle all this year. At the end, the captains of the north brought the head of their king, turned to David, defected to David, and said, I killed Ishbosheth.
那第9節
Verse 9. But David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, and said to them, As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity. Verse 9.
他兄弟巴拿說：“我指着救我性命脫離一切苦難永生的耶和華起誓。”
As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity.
永生的耶和華。
David said,
他說：“沒有人
No
救
one
我，
redeemed me.
我單單
No one
靠
saved me. I trust in God alone. The Lord has redeemed my life from all adversity,
一切艱難。
all hardship. I trust in
是耶
God.
和華神拯
It
救我，
is the Lord who has redeemed me.
一切的問題是神為
All
我解決。
problems solved by God.
單倚靠神。
我自此至今單單倚靠
I
神
always just trust in God.
所有的苦
All
難都是神救
adversity,
我唔使人
I
幫
was
我
redeemed
我
from
人
all
幫我
adversity by God. I do not
當
need
然
help
人
from
幫他
any
開
man.
心的
But yeah, if other people help them,
亞比
help
亞
him,
他來
he's
投靠
fine.
他開心
When
的
Abiathite turned to him, I'm happy, but I do not trust in God. I do not trust in man. I trust in God alone. Brother and sister, this is worth highlight.
要有嘅心。
成為我們今天現有
This
的
is the
心
heart we must have. Verse 9
在
here.
一切苦難當中
From in all adversity,
大衛知道是神拯救他
David knew that it was God who delivered him, redeemed him.
一切
The Lord lives who has redeemed my life from all adversity.
嗱，我先交代埋啲經文再講。
我先交代經文呢，我們再講
所以
Okay, I will
佢就
come back here after I finish the whole chapter.
所以他就把這
That's
兩個
why
人殺了
he killed these two men, these two captains.
報消息嘅時候，我係咁樣
When
對佢
someone told me saying, look, Saul is dead, and then I had him executed in Ziklag. Verse 10.
人係睇錯大
The
衛
one
嘅
who thought
其
I
實
would
是
give
世人看錯了大衛
people misjudge
我哋
David.
跟從神嘅人，我哋可以認識睇穿每一個人。
我們跟從神的人，我們可以認識看全每
As
個人
但係唔跟
people,
從神嘅人
as
唔能
for
夠
those
睇
who
透我哋
follow
但是
God,
不跟從
we
神
look
的人
through
不能
all
看
things.
透我
佢
But
好唔明白
those who do
他
not
很不
follow
明白
God,
我們
they do not understand us.
喂，
Do not understand us.
殺咗掃羅，
Hey,
我殺了掃
攞
羅，
埋佢衣
I killed
嘅
Saul
冠冕嚟俾你，
我拿了他的冠冕給你，
I got his crown to show
你
you.
不是應該謝謝
你
我
應該
嗎？
多謝我
You
㗎。
do not thank
佢
me.
哋睇錯，
You should have thanked
呢
me.
兩個軍長攞
They
住
got it wrong.
以斯
They
波斯嘅
misjudged
首級
this
這
one.
兩個軍長
These
拿着
two
以斯
captains
波
with
瑟
the
的首
head
級
of Ishbosheth.
幾犀利啊！
哇，好棒哦！
Wow.
以色列國嘅權柄
Awesome, right?
整個以色列國的權柄，
That's the power over the whole house of Israel. Now I give it to
點解
you.
獎我
你剛講
You
很
should
好
have thanked me. You should have rewarded me.
是不是這是人的想法？
That's man's
那
perspective.
我們不明白大衛，
But they did not understand David.
大衛不單止不獎賞他，
Not only did David not
說
reward
以前
them,
我是這樣做，
現在我
he
繼續
did. He
我
also
現在
said,
繼續是這樣做。
in the past I did that to the Amalekites.
唔可以
I
益
follow
掃家
God.
嘅
不可以去碰掃
I
羅
do
家
not touch the house of
你咁
Saul.
樣係殺義人嘅血，流義人嘅血。
你這是流義人的血，
You did this. You shed the blood of the righteous.
於是把他們砍斷了手腳，
殺咗佢哋，斬咗佢哋嘅
So
殺
now
了他們，砍斷了
execute
手
them,
腳
cut off their hands and feet, and hang them by the pole in Hebron. Why did David do this?
告訴所有人，
To tell
合
everyone
神心意嘅事，我哋唔好做。
這些不合神心意的事，我
we
們不
do
要
not
做
do these things that
大
are
逆不道
displeasing
的
to
事
God.
不要做。
Do not do these
佢就將
rebellious
以斯波斯嘅
things.
埋葬。
於是把伊斯波瑟的首級埋葬。
And then he buried the head of Ishbosheth in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. Verse 12.
睇到大衛嘅心，
我們看到大衛的心，
We see the heart of
唔
David.
假手於人，
他不假手於人，
佢唔依靠人，
He
他
did
不
not
倚靠人，
喺一切
rely
嘅艱難
on
當中
any
佢
help.
只係依靠神。
在一切艱
In
難中，他
all
只倚靠神，
adversities, he trusts in
神
God
會為
alone.
他開
即係
路。
聖經嚟到呢
God
度
will
呢四
open a
章
way for
今
him.
天來到這裡4章，
So these 4 chapters of 2
甚
Samuel
至之前嘅撒母耳記上，
甚至之前的沙漠記上
and，also 1 Samuel,
看到掃羅家不跟從神，
越走越
the house of Saul
越
did not follow
越
God.
走越微弱，
They grew weaker and weaker as they walked.
兒子死了，
孫
His
子
sons
孫子
died.
死了，
嗱，而家咧
His
佢嘅
grandson
元帥
died.
死啦，
現在他的元帥死了，
佢兩個
His
軍長
commander
都
died.
他的軍長
Abner.
也死了，
The 2 captains died.
但係大衛家咧，
但是大衛家
But the house of
心一路
David,
跟住神，
他的心一直跟着神，
his heart after God's own heart.
唔假手任何
His
他
heart
不假
after
手
God.
任何人，
佢仰望
He
神，
didn't rely on
佢
anyone.
一路往
He
前
looked
他
to
一
God.
路往
佢就越
前行，
行越強，
He
他就
continued
越
to
走
walk.
越強，
並且走上
Then he
佢嘅
grew
命
stronger
並且
and
走上
stronger
他的命令
建立，大
and
衛
walk
嘅國
into
建
his
立大
destiny
衛的國度。
and establish David's
今日我
kingdom.
哋嘅處境當中
弟兄姊妹，在
Brothers
今天
and
我們的
sisters,
處境裡
in our current
我們應該怎
situation,
麼樣？
what should we
我
do?
哋就要有呢個心。
我們就是要有這樣的心。
喺
We
世
must
界
have
咁動
this
盪嘅
heart.
時候
在世界這麼動盪的時候，
When the world is in
各樣
turmoil,
艱難當中，
我哋應該
in all adversity, what should we do?
人嚟幫你，
不要期待人來幫
Do
你，
not expect people to help us.
依靠人啦，
不是依靠人，
唔
Do
可以
not
依靠
rely on
軍長
people.
不是依靠軍長。
Do not rely on captains.
殺你
這兩個軍長可能會把你
These two
殺
captains may kill you.
不要依靠元帥，
Do not rely on a commander.
不要依靠武力，
Do not rely on military
單
power.
單依靠神。
我們單單依靠神。
我哋要知道
We
係
rely on
永
God
生
alone.
嘅耶和華救我哋
It's the
脱離
Lord who
一切
lives, who
我
has
們要知道
redeemed
是
our
永生的耶
lives
和華
from
救
all
你救我們
adversity.
脫離一切苦難。
And in the name of Jesus, I
我
declare
也奉耶穌基督名宣告，
永生嘅神，
the ever
永生
living,
的神，
我哋所
the
信嘅
Lord
神
我們所信的神
lives.
救我哋所有人
The
救
God
我
we
們所有人
believe
脱離我哋
redeems
今日嘅苦
all of us from all adversity.
神與你同在。
God is with us. Bless you all. That's the end of the message today.